On a rainy night in Greystone, Emily Harper's doorbell rang at 10:17 p.m. with a pizza she didn't order. The delivery boy's too wide smile and dark, unblinking eyes hinted at a sinister sender who knew her name. The rain had been falling for hours in the small town of Greystone, a place where nothing much happened. The streets were slick, reflecting the dim glow of streetlights that flickered like they were tired of their job. At 42 Maple Street, a modest two-story house with peeling white paint sat at the end of a cul-de-sac. Inside, Emily Harper, a 32-year-old accountant, sat on her couch, her laptop balanced on her knees. She was working late as she often did, her eyes scanning spreadsheets filled with numbers that blurred together after hours of staring. The clock on the wall ticked toward 10:17 p.m., its second hand moving with a faint, monotonous click. Emily's living room was ordinary, almost aggressively so. Beige walls, a faded blue couch, a coffee table with a chipped corner, and a TV that hadn't been turned on in weeks. A single lamp cast a yellow glow over the room, leaving shadows in the corners that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking. The rain tapped against the windows, a steady rhythm that made the house feel smaller, more isolated. She lived alone, had for 3 years since her divorce, and she liked it that way. No one to bother her, no one to leave dishes in the sink or socks on the floor. She was halfway through balancing a client's ledger when the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, jarring sound cutting through the drone of the rain. Emily froze, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She hadn't ordered anything. No packages were due, and she wasn't expecting visitors. Greystone wasn't the kind of place where people dropped by unannounced, especially not this late. The doorbell rang again, 2 quick chimes, as if the person outside was impatient. Who could that be? She muttered, setting her laptop on the coffee table. She stood, smoothing her gray sweatshirt, and crossed the room to the front door. The peephole was fogged with age, but she pressed her eye to it anyway. Outside, under the dim porch light, stood a young man in a red jacket with a pizza box in his hands. His cap was pulled low, and the rain glistened on his shoulders. He looked ordinary enough, but something about the way he stood perfectly still, head tilted slightly, made her stomach twist. She opened the door a crack, keeping the chain lock in place. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice steady but cautious. The delivery boy looked up, and Emily saw his face clearly for the first time. He was young, maybe 20, with pale skin and dark eyes that seemed too large for his face. His smile was wide, showing too many teeth, and it didn't reach his eyes. "Pizza delivery," he said, his voice flat, almost mechanical. He held up the box, which had the logo of Tony's Pizzeria, a place Emily hadn't ordered from in months. "I didn't order a pizza," she said, frowning. "You must have the wrong address." The boy's smile didn't falter. 42 Maple Street, right, this is for you, already paid for. He tilted his head further, as if studying her. The rain dripped from the brim of his cap, but he didn't seem to notice. "No, I didn't order anything," Emily repeated, her hand tightening on the door. "Who paid for it?" The boy shrugged, a slow, exaggerated motion. "Anonymous. Happens sometimes. You want it or not." He pushed the box closer to the door, and the smell of pepperoni and cheese wafted through the gap. It was warm, fresh, and oddly out of place in the cold, wet night. Emily hesitated. She was hungry. She hadn't eaten since a granola bar at lunch, but something about this felt wrong. The boy's eyes were fixed on her, unblinking, and his smile seemed to grow wider, if that was possible. But it was just a pizza, she told herself. Maybe a neighbor had sent it as a gesture, or maybe it was a mix-up. She undid the chain lock and opened the door fully, reaching for the box. "Thanks," she said, taking it. The box was warm against her hands, heavier than she expected. The boy didn't move. He just stood there staring, his hands now empty but still hanging at his sides like they were weighted. "You gonna tip?" he asked, his voice still flat, but there was a slight edge to it now, like he was testing her. "Oh, right." Emily fumbled in her pocket, pulling out a crumpled $5 bill. She held it out, and he took it slowly, his fingers brushing hers. They were cold, unnaturally so, light. He'd been standing in the rain for hours. She pulled her hand back quickly. "Have a good night," he said, turning and walking back into the rain. His steps were slow, deliberate, and he didn't look back. Emily watched him disappear into the darkness beyond the porch light, then closed the door and locked it, sliding the deadbolt into place for good measure. She carried the pizza box to the kitchen, setting it on the counter. The smell was stronger now, tempting, but her unease hadn't faded. She opened the box, expecting a standard pepperoni pizza, but what she saw made her pause. The pizza was perfectly round, the cheese melted just right, but there was something off about it. The pepperoni slices were arranged in a spiral, too precise, almost like a pattern. In the center, a single slice of green pepper sat, though she hadn't ordered anything with peppers. "Weird," she muttered. Closing the box, she wasn't sure she wanted to eat it anymore. Instead, she returned to the living room, her laptop still open on the coffee table. The numbers on the screen felt safer, more predictable. She tried to focus, but her mind kept drifting back to the delivery boy. His smile, his eyes. The way he'd stood so still. She glanced at the window, half expecting to see him staring through the glass, but there was only rain and darkness. The clock ticked on, marking 10:35 p.m. Emily forced herself to work, typing numbers into cells, checking and rechecking her calculations. The house was quiet except for the rain and the clock, but every so often, she thought she heard something else, a faint creak from the hallway, a soft tap against the window. She told herself it was nothing, just the house settling or the wind picking up. Greystone was old, full of creaky houses and overactive imaginations. At 11:02 p.m., the doorbell rang again. Emily's head snapped up. Her heart thudded in her chest, louder than the rain. She set her laptop aside and stood, moving slowly to the door. The peephole showed nothing but the empty porch, the rain still falling in sheets. She opened the door. A crack, just enough to peek out. No one was there. No delivery boy, no car in the driveway, no footsteps fading into the night. Just the rain and the faint smell of pepperoni lingering in the air. She closed the door and locked it, her hands shaking slightly. "Get a grip, Emily," she whispered. Returning to the kitchen, the pizza box was still on the counter, unopened since she'd last looked at it. She lifted the lid again and her breath caught. The spiral of pepperoni was still there, but the green pepper slice in the center was gone. In its place was a small, folded piece of paper. No, bigger than a post-it note. She picked it up, her fingers trembling. The paper was damp, as if it had been left out in the rain, but the ink was clear, written in a neat, looping script. "Enjoy your meal. I'll be back." Emily dropped the paper, her heart racing. She backed away from the counter, her eyes darting to the windows, the doors, the shadows in the corners. The house felt different now, like it was holding its breath. She grabbed her phone, ready to call the police, but hesitated. What would she say? A creepy delivery boy brought a pizza she didn't order. There was a note in the box. It sounded ridiculous, even to her. Instead, she double-checked the locks on every door and window, her footsteps echoing in the quiet house. The rain was louder now, a constant drumming that made it hard to hear anything else. She returned to the living room, sitting on the couch with her phone in her hand, the pizza box still on the kitchen counter. She didn't touch it again that night. The clock ticked toward midnight, each second dragging on longer than the last. Emily tried to focus on her work, but the numbers on the screen seemed meaningless now. She kept glancing at the door. Windows, the hallway leading to the darkened staircase. The house was too big, too empty, and the rain was too loud. She told herself she was being paranoid, that the note was just a prank, that the delivery boy was just some kid messing around. But deep down, she knew better. Something was wrong. Something was coming. The rain hadn't stopped. It beat against the windows of 42 Maple Street, a relentless patter that filled the silence of Emily Harper's house. It was 12:47 a.m. now, and the clock on the living room wall ticked with the same monotonous rhythm, each second dragging like a weight. Emily sat on her couch, her laptop closed on the coffee table, its screen dark. She hadn't touched her work since finding the note in the pizza box. The folded paper sat on the kitchen counter next to the unopened box. Its words, "Enjoy your meal." "I'll be back," etched in her mind. She held her phone, the screen glowing with the local police department's non-emergency number, her thumb hovering over the call button. She hadn't dialed yet. What could she say? A pizza she didn't order showed up, and there was a creepy note inside. It sounded like something a teenager would make up to scare a friend. The police would probably laugh, tell her to throw out the pizza and go to bed. Still, her eyes kept darting to the front door, expecting the doorbell to ring again. The house was too quiet, except for the rain. Emily stood, her bare feet cold against the hardwood floor, and walked to the kitchen. The pizza box was still there, its cardboard edges slightly curled from the damp air. She hadn't touched it since dropping the note, but the smell of pepperoni lingered, faint but persistent. She lifted the lid, just a crack, and peered inside. The spiral of pepperoni slices was still there, unnaturally precise, but something was different. The cheese seemed to have shifted, as if it had melted further after she'd last looked, though the box was cold now. She closed it quickly, her pulse quickening. "Stupid," she muttered, rubbing her eyes. She was tired, that was all. The late hours, the spreadsheets, the rain. It was making her see things. She turned on the kitchen light, a harsh fluorescent glow that banished the shadows but made the room feel sterile, like a hospital. The note was still on the counter, its damp edges curling. She picked it up, unfolded it again, and stared at the neat, looping handwriting. It was too perfect, like it had been traced from a template. She crumpled it and tossed it into the trash can under the sink, then tied the bag and carried it to the back door. The backyard was a small, fenced-in square of grass, now a muddy mess under the rain. The garbage bins were lined up against the fence, their lids slick with water. Emily hesitated at the door, her hand on the knob. The porch light was off, and the yard was shrouded in darkness. She flicked the switch, but the bulb didn't respond. "Great," she sighed, grabbing a flashlight from a drawer. Its beam was weak, barely cutting through the rain as she stepped outside. The air was cold, the rain soaking her sweatshirt as she hurried to the bins. She lifted the lid of the recycling bin, then froze. Something was inside, nestled among the empty cans and cardboard. It was another pizza box, identical to the one in her kitchen, down to the Tony's Pizzeria logo. Her breath caught, and she shone the flashlight closer. The box was damp, the cardboard sagging, but it looked new, unopened. She hadn't ordered pizza in months, and she certainly hadn't thrown one out here. She backed away, the trash bag still in her hand, and ran back inside, slamming the door and locking it. Her heart pounded as she leaned against the counter, the flashlight shaking in her grip. "It's just a coincidence," she told herself, her voice barely audible over the rain. Maybe a neighbor had thrown it out. Maybe Tony's had a promotion, delivering free pizzas to everyone on the street. But the memory of the delivery boy's too wide smile and cold fingers made her stomach churn. She returned to the living room, trying to shake off the unease. The clock read 1:15 a.m. She needed to sleep, but the idea of going upstairs, of being alone in her bedroom with the lights off, felt impossible. Instead, she sat back on the couch, pulling a blanket over her legs. The rain was louder now, a steady roar that drowned out the clock's ticking. She scrolled through her phone, opening the Tony's Pizzeria website to check their hours. The site was basic, with a red and white checkered background and a menu that hadn't been updated in years. It said they closed at 10 p.m., which meant the delivery at 10:17 was already strange. She clicked on the Contact Us page, but the phone number was disconnected when she tried it. The email link bounced back with an error message. Frustrated, she opened the X app, searching for mentions of Tony's Pizzeria in Greystone. A few posts popped up, mostly complaints about cold food or slow service, but nothing recent. One post, dated 3 months ago, caught her eye. Anyone else get a weird pizza delivery from Tony's? No one ordered it, and the guy just stood there staring. Creepy AF. The user hadn't posted since. Emily's mouth went dry. She scrolled further, but the app was sluggish, buffering every few seconds. The rain seemed to be interfering with the signal. She set the phone down and glanced at the front door again. The deadbolt was still in place, the chain lock secure. She was safe. She had to be. At 1:43 a.m., a noise came from upstairs. It was faint, like a chair being dragged across the floor, but it stopped almost immediately. Emily froze, her breath shallow. The house was old, she reminded herself. Floorboards creaked, pipes groaned, but the sound came again, slower this time, deliberate. Scrape, pause, scrape. She grabbed the flashlight and stood, her legs unsteady. The staircase was at the end of the hallway, shrouded in shadow. She flicked on the hallway light, but it flickered and went out, leaving her in near darkness. The flashlight beam wobbled as she pointed it up the stairs. "Hello," she called, her voice cracking. No answer, just the rain and the faint drip of water somewhere in the house. She took a step, then another, the flashlight illuminating the worn carpet on the stairs. At the top, the hallway stretched left and right, leading to her bedroom, a guest room, and a small bathroom. The scraping had come from the guest room, she was sure of it. She moved slowly, her free hand trailing along the wall for balance. The air was colder up here, damp, like the rain had somehow gotten inside. The guest room door was ajar, though she was certain she'd closed it last week when she'd dusted. She pushed it open, the hinges creaking softly. The room was empty, just a twin bed with a faded quilt, a dresser, and a small window. The flashlight beam swept over the floor, catching something in the corner. A single pepperoni slice, curled at the edges, lay on the carpet. It was fresh, glistening as if it had just been placed there. Emily backed out, her heart hammering. She closed the door and ran downstairs, grabbing her phone. This time she dialed 911. "There's someone in my house," she whispered when the operator answered. She gave her address, her voice trembling as she described the pizza, the note, the noises. The operator told her to stay calm, that an officer would be there soon. "Lock yourself in a room if you can," the operator said. "Stay on the line." Emily didn't want to go back upstairs. She locked herself in the downstairs bathroom, the smallest room in the house, and sat on the edge of the tub, clutching the phone. The rain was deafening now, like 1,000 tiny hammers against the roof. The operator's voice was calm, asking her to describe the delivery boy, but Emily could barely focus. She kept seeing his smile, those two large eyes. At 2:12 a.m., headlights flashed through the bathroom window. Emily peered out, seeing a police car pull into her driveway. Relief flooded her, but it was short-lived. The officer knocked, and when she opened the door, he was alone, his uniform soaked from the rain. "Ma'am, you reported an intruder," he asked, his tone professional but tired. She explained everything: the pizza, the note, the noises, the pepperoni upstairs. The officer, a middle-aged man with a graying mustache, listened patiently, then asked to see the pizza box. They walked to the kitchen, and Emily lifted the lid. The spiral of pepperoni was gone. The pizza was plain cheese now, the surface smooth and unblemished. The note was gone from the trash, too. The officer raised an eyebrow. "You sure about this, ma'am?" he asked, his voice skeptical. Emily's face burned. She insisted, leading him upstairs to the guest room. But the pepperoni slice was gone, the carpet clean. The officer checked the house, finding nothing out of place. "Probably just the storm," he said, handing her his card. "Call if anything else happens." He left, and Emily locked the door behind him. The rain hadn't stopped, and the clock ticked toward 3:00 a.m. She sat on the couch, the flashlight in her lap, listening to the house. The scraping sound didn't return, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still there, waiting. The rain hadn't stopped, and it was 3:37 a.m. at 42 Maple Street. The house was a cocoon of silence, broken only by the steady drumming of water against the roof and windows. Emily Harper sat on her couch, the flashlight still in her lap, its beam dimming as the batteries weakened. The police officer's card lay on the coffee table, its edges curling in the damp air. She hadn't called him back. What was the point? The pizza box was just cheese now, the note gone, the pepperoni slice vanished. She felt foolish like a child scared of shadows. The clock on the wall ticked, each second a small, mechanical heartbeat. Emily's eyes were heavy, but sleep was out of the question. The house felt different now, like it was watching her. She stood, her legs stiff from sitting so long, and walked to the kitchen. The pizza box was still on the counter, its presence a quiet accusation. She hadn't thrown it out, though she couldn't say why. Maybe it was evidence, or maybe she was just too tired to deal with it. She opened the lid again, half expecting another change, but the cheese pizza stared back, plain and unremarkable. The spiral was gone, as if it had never been there. She closed the box and turned to the sink, filling a kettle with water. Coffee would help, she thought, something to keep her awake until morning. The faucet sputtered, spitting out a stream of murky water before clearing. She frowned, watching the brown tint swirl down the drain. The pipes were old, like everything else in Greystone. She set the kettle on the stove, the gas flame hissing as it lit. The kitchen was cold, the air heavy with the smell of rain and something else, something metallic, like rust. While the kettle heated, Emily checked her phone. The signal was weak, one bar flickering in and out. She tried calling her friend Sarah, who lived a few streets over, but the call dropped before it could connect. The X app was still sluggish, buffering endlessly when she tried to search for more posts about Tony's Pizzeria. She typed Greystone Pizza Delivery into the search bar, but the results were sparse. Sold reviews, a few photos of soggy pizzas, nothing useful. The post she'd seen earlier about the creepy delivery boy was gone now, deleted or lost in the app's glitchy interface. The kettle whistled, startling her. She poured the water into a mug, stirring in instant coffee granules. The smell was sharp, grounding, but it didn't chase away the unease. She carried the mug to the living room, glancing at the front door as she passed. The deadbolt was still locked, the chain in place. She checked the back door, the windows, the basement door, moving through the house with methodical precision. Each lock was secure, each window shut tight, but the routine felt hollow, like locking the door after something was already inside. At 4:19 a.m., a thud came from the front porch. It was soft, muffled by the rain, but unmistakable. Emily froze, the coffee mug warm against her hands. She set it down and grabbed the flashlight, its beam now a faint yellow glow. She crept to the door, her socks silent on the hardwood, and peered through the peephole. The porch was empty, the rain falling in sheets, but something was there, a dark shape on the welcome mat, another pizza box. Her stomach twisted. She didn't want to open the door, but she needed to know. She undid the chain, her hands trembling, and cracked the door just enough to grab the box. It was identical to the first, the Tony's Pizzeria logo smudged by the rain. She pulled it inside, locking the door quickly, and carried it to the kitchen. The first box was still on the counter, and now there were two, side by side like twins. She opened the new one, her breath shallow. Inside was another cheese pizza, but this time there was a message scratched into the cheese, the letters uneven and jagged. You didn't eat the first one. Emily slammed the lid shut, backing away. Her heart pounded, her vision blurring at the edges. She grabbed her phone, dialing 911 again, but the call wouldn't connect. The signal was gone now, the screen showing no service. She tried the Wi-Fi, but the router was dead, the lights dark. The rain was louder, a roaring wall of sound that swallowed everything else. She needed to get out. The house wasn't safe, not with the boxes, the noises, the messages. She grabbed her keys, a jacket, and the flashlight, its beam now barely a flicker. The car was in the driveway, just a few steps from the front door. She could drive to Sarah's, or the police station, or anywhere but here. She opened the front door, the rain hitting her face like needles, and stopped. The driveway was empty. Her car, a gray sedan she'd parked there yesterday, was gone. Emily stumbled back inside, slamming the door. Her breath came in short gasps, her mind racing. Had she parked it somewhere else? No, she remembered driving home from the grocery store, pulling into the driveway. She checked the window, hoping she was wrong, but the driveway was empty, the rain pooling in the tire tracks. She ran to the back door, thinking maybe she'd left it in the alley, but the yard was empty too, just the garbage bins and the muddy grass. She returned to the kitchen, her jacket dripping water onto the floor. The 2 pizza boxes sat there, silent and accusing. She grabbed a knife from the drawer, its blade dull but better than nothing, and sat at the kitchen table, facing the boxes. The clock ticked toward 5:00 a.m. The sky outside still dark, the rain unending. She tried to think to make sense of it, but her thoughts were scattered. The delivery boy, the note, the pizza, the car route was all connected, but how? At 5:23 a.m., the power went out. The kitchen light flickered and died, plunging the house into darkness. The flashlight was useless now, its batteries dead. Emily gripped the knife, her eyes straining to see in the dim glow from the streetlights outside. The rain was a constant roar, but beneath it, she heard something else. A soft, deliberate creak from the hallway. Not the house settling, not the pipes. It was the sound of footsteps, slow and careful, moving toward the kitchen. She stood, the knife shaking in her hand, and backed toward the living room. The creak came again, closer now, and then stopped. Silence, except for the rain. She held her breath, listening, waiting. Then, from the hallway, a voice. Low, flat, familiar. "You didn't eat the pizza," it said, and Emily's blood ran cold. It was the delivery boy's voice, the same mechanical tone from the porch. She ran to the front door, fumbling with the locks, but her hands were slick with sweat, the knife clattering to the floor. The voice came again, closer now, from the kitchen. "I told you I'd be back." She yanked the door open, the rain pouring in, and stumbled onto the porch. The street was empty, the houses dark, the rain a curtain that hid everything beyond a few feet. She ran, her socks soaking through as she crossed the muddy lawn. The police station was a mile away, through the center of Greystone. She didn't look back, didn't stop, the rain blinding her as she ran down Maple Street. The town was asleep, the shops closed, the streets deserted. She passed Tony's Pizzeria, its sign dark, the windows boarded up. It looked abandoned, like it hadn't been open in years, though she could have sworn she'd seen it lit up last month. She reached Sarah's house at 5:47 a.m., banging on the door, no answer. The windows were dark, the driveway empty. Sarah was probably asleep, or maybe she was out of town. Emily pounded harder, her fists aching, but the house stayed silent. She sank to the porch, the rain soaking her through, and tried to think. The police station was too far to run in this storm, and her phone was useless. She was alone, and something was following her. Part 4. The rain poured down on Greystone, turning the streets into shallow rivers that gurgled around storm drains. It was 6:12 a.m., and the sky was still dark, the clouds so thick they smothered any hint of dawn. Emily Harper stood on Sarah's porch, her clothes soaked through, her socks heavy with mud. Her fists ached from pounding on the door, but the house remained silent, its windows staring back like empty eyes. She wiped water from her face, her hands trembling, and tried to think. The police station was her only option now, but it was half a mile away, and the rain made every step feel like wading through molasses. She stepped off the porch, her feet sinking into the muddy lawn, and started down Elm Street. The town was unnaturally quiet, the only sound the rain and her own ragged breathing. The houses she passed were dark, their curtains drawn, no cars in the driveways. Greystone was small, barely 3,000 people, but it had never felt this empty. She glanced back at Sarah's house, half expecting to see a figure in the window, but there was nothing, just the rain and the darkness. Her flashlight was dead, left behind in her house, and her phone was useless, its screen black from water damage or a dead battery. She hugged her jacket tighter, though it did little to keep out the cold. The knife was gone too, dropped in her panic to escape. She was defenseless, alone, and the memory of the delivery boy's voice, "You didn't eat the pizza," echoed in her mind, sharp and cold like the rain. She reached Main Street, where the shops and diners of Greystone's downtown stood in a neat row. The streetlights flickered, their light weak and uneven, casting long shadows that seemed to move when she wasn't looking. She passed the hardware store, its windows boarded up, and the diner, its neon sign dark. Tony's Pizzeria was just ahead, its faded sign barely visible through the rain. She hadn't planned to stop there, but her feet slowed, her eyes drawn to the building. It looked wrong, like it didn't belong, like it had been abandoned for years, though she remembered seeing it open not long ago. The windows were boarded, the wood splintered and gray, but the front door was ajar, a sliver of darkness visible inside. Emily's heart pounded, but she needed answers. The pizza boxes, the note, the voice. They all led back to this place. She glanced around, but the street was empty, the rain a curtain that hid her from the world. She pushed the door open, the hinges creaking, and stepped inside. The air was stale, heavy with the smell of mildew and something sour, like old grease. The flashlight on her phone was dead, but a faint glow came from somewhere deeper in the building, flickering like a dying bulb. The dining area was small, with checkered tablecloths and booths that sagged under years of neglect. Menus were scattered on the tables, their edges curled, the print faded. Emily picked one up, her fingers leaving wet smudges on the paper. The specials listed were ordinary: pepperoni, cheese, sausage. But at the bottom, in the same neat, looping script as the note, was her name, Emily Harper, 42 Maple Street. She dropped the menu, her breath catching. The glow flickered again, coming from the kitchen at the back. She moved toward it, her shoes squeaking on the linoleum floor. The counter was covered in dust, but there were fresh footprints, small, deliberate, leading to the kitchen door. She pushed it open, the hinges silent this time, and stepped inside. The kitchen was a maze of stainless steel counters and rusted appliances. The glow came from a single bulb above an oven, its light casting harsh shadows. On the counter was a pizza box, identical to the ones in her house, the Tony's Pizzeria logo pristine despite the decay around it. Emily's hand shook as she lifted the lid. Inside was another cheese pizza, but the surface was carved with words, the letters deep and jagged. "Why are you running?" She backed away, her hip hitting a counter, knocking over a stack of metal trays that clattered to the floor. The sound was deafening in the silence, and she froze, listening. The rain was fainter here, muffled by the walls, but she heard something else, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming on wood. It came from behind her, from the dining area. She turned, her eyes straining in the dim light, and saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was the delivery boy, his red jacket glistening with rain, his cap pulled low. His smile was the same, too wide, showing too many teeth. "You didn't eat the pizza," he said, his voice flat, mechanical. He took a step forward, his shoes leaving wet prints on the floor. "I told you I'd be back." Emily ran, shoving past a counter, her shoulders scraping against a rusted edge. She burst through the kitchen door, back into the dining area, and sprinted for the exit. The boy didn't chase her, but his voice followed, echoing in the empty space. "You can't leave, Emily. It's already paid for." She stumbled onto Main Street, the rain hitting her like a wall. She ran, her legs burning, her breath coming in gasps. The police station was close now, just a few blocks away. She didn't look back, didn't stop, even when her shoes slipped on the wet pavement. The town was still empty, the houses and shops silent, like they were holding their breath. She reached the police station at 6:58 a.m., its brick facade looming through the rain. The lights were off, the parking lot empty. She banged on the door, her fists leaving wet smears on the glass. "Please," she shouted, her voice hoarse. No answer. She peered through the window, but the lobby was dark, the desks abandoned. A sign on the door read "Closed for maintenance," but there were no workers, no tools, no sign of life. Emily sank to the ground, the rain pooling around her. She was exhausted, her body aching, her mind frayed. The delivery boy's voice echoed in her head. His smile burned into her memory. She didn't know what he wanted, or why the pizzas kept appearing, but she knew she couldn't go home. Not with the boxes, the voice, the footprints. She stood, her legs unsteady, and started walking. The rain was lighter now, a steady drizzle, but the cold had settled into her bones. She needed shelter, somewhere to think. The diner was her only option. It was always open, even in storms. She retraced her steps down Main Street, passing Tony's Pizzeria again. The door was closed now, the windows dark, like she'd never been inside. The diner was at the end of the street, its neon sign flickering weakly. She pushed the door open, a bell jingling above. The place was empty, the tables wiped clean, the air smelling of coffee and burnt toast. A waitress stood behind the counter, her back to Emily, wiping down a coffee pot. "Sit anywhere," she said without turning, her voice tired. Emily slid into a booth, her wet clothes sticking to the vinyl seat. She glanced at the menu, but the words blurred together. The waitress approached, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and a name tag that read Doris. "Coffee?" she asked, her eyes barely meeting Emily's. "Yes, please," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, then added, "Have you seen a delivery boy from Tony's Pizzeria? Red jacket, young, kind of, strange." Doris paused, her hand on the coffee pot. "Tony's hasn't been open in years," she said, her tone flat, "closed down after the fire. Nobody delivers from there." She poured the coffee and walked away, leaving Emily staring at the steaming mug. Emily's hands shook as she lifted the cup. A fire. She'd never heard about a fire at Tony's, and she'd lived in Greystone for a decade. She glanced out the window, the rain streaking down the glass. The street was still empty, but she thought she saw something. A flash of red in the distance, gone when she blinked. The rain had slowed to a drizzle by 7:34 a.m., but Greystone remained cloaked in a gray, heavy mist that clung to the streets like damp cotton. Emily Harper sat in the diner, her hands wrapped around a cooling mug of coffee, the bitter taste lingering on her tongue. The booth's vinyl seat creaked under her weight, her wet clothes sticking to her skin. The waitress, Doris, was at the counter, wiping the same spot over and over with a rag, her movements mechanical. The diner was still empty, the bell above the door silent, the neon sign outside flickering weakly. Emily's eyes burned from lack of sleep, her body aching from running through the storm. The delivery boy's smile, his flat voice, "You didn't eat the pizza," played on a loop in her mind. Doris's words about Tony's Pizzeria, closed after a fire, made no sense. She'd seen the place open, hadn't she? Or had it been months ago, a memory blurred by routine? She couldn't trust her own thoughts anymore, not after the pizza boxes, the notes, the voice in her house. She needed to go home. The thought was irrational, but it rooted itself in her mind. Her house was where it started the first pizza, the note, the noises. Maybe there was something there, a clue, a way to end this. Or maybe she just couldn't run anymore. She stood, leaving a crumpled dollar on the table, and pushed the door open. The bell jingled, a sharp sound in the quiet, but Doris didn't look up. The walk back to 42 Maple Street was slow, her shoes squelching on the wet pavement. The town was still deserted, the houses dark, the streets empty. She passed Tony's Pizzeria again, its windows boarded, the door now locked tight. She didn't stop, didn't look too closely, but she felt it watching her, like the building had eyes. The mist thickened as she turned onto Maple Street, her house coming into view at the end of the cul-de-sac. It looked smaller, the peeling paint more pronounced, the windows darker than she remembered. She reached the front porch at 8:03 a.m., the welcome mat sodden under her feet. The door was still ajar, just as she'd left it in her panic to escape. She pushed it open, the hinges creaking, and stepped inside. The air was cold, damp, the smell of pepperoni faint but unmistakable. The living room was unchanged, the couch, the coffee table, the clock ticking toward 8:04 a.m. Her laptop was still there, closed, a thin layer of dust on its lid, though she'd only been gone a few hours. She moved to the kitchen, her heart thudding. The 2 pizza boxes were on the counter, but now there were 3. A new box, identical to the others, sat stacked on top. The Tony's Pizzeria logo crisp and unblemished. Her breath caught, and she backed away, her hip brushing the counter. She didn't want to open it, but her hands moved on their own, lifting the lid. Inside was another cheese pizza, the surface smooth, except for a single word carved into the cheese. "Eat." Emily slammed the lid shut, her hands shaking. She grabbed the boxes, all 3, and carried them to the back door, intending to throw them in the garbage bins. The yard was a muddy swamp, the bins still lined up against the fence. She lifted the lid of the trash bin, and her stomach dropped. It was full of pizza boxes, dozens of them, stacked neatly, their logos identical. They were dry, untouched by the rain, as if they'd been placed there moments ago. She dropped the boxes she was holding, stumbling back into the house. She locked the door, her fingers fumbling with the deadbolt, and leaned against it, her breath coming in gasps. The clock ticked on, marking 8:17 a.m. She needed to leave, to find someone, anyone, but the town was empty. The police station closed, her car gone. She was trapped, and the house knew it. She returned to the living room, sitting on the couch, her eyes fixed on the front door. The mist outside pressed against the windows, turning the glass opaque. She tried to think, to piece it together. The fire at Tony's, the delivery boy, the pizzas, it was all connected. But the edges of the puzzle wouldn't fit. She stood, pacing the room, her socks leaving wet prints on the hardwood. The clock ticked, the mist thickened, the house waited. At 8:42 a.m., she noticed something on the coffee table, half hidden under the police officer's card. It was a newspaper clipping, yellowed and brittle, though she was sure it hadn't been there before. She picked it up, her hands trembling. The headline read, "Fire at Tony's Pizzeria claims 1 life." The article was brief, dated 10 years ago. A delivery boy, unnamed, had died in a kitchen fire, the cause unknown. The pizzeria closed shortly after. There was a grainy photo of the building, its windows blackened, and in the foreground, a figure in a red jacket, his face blurred but familiar. Emily dropped the clipping, her heart racing. She moved to the kitchen, avoiding the pizza boxes, and opened a drawer, searching for anything: a flashlight, a weapon, a phone charger. She found a stack of old mail, bills, and junk flyers, and beneath them, another note in that neat, looping script. "You were supposed to eat it, Emily." She crumpled it, her hands shaking, and threw it into the sink. The doorbell rang at 9:01 a.m., a sharp chime that cut through the silence. Emily froze, her eyes darting to the front door. She didn't move, didn't breathe, but the bell rang again. 2 quick chimes, impatient. She crept to the door, her heart pounding, and peered through the peephole. The delivery boy stood on the porch, his red jacket dry despite the mist, his cap pulled low. His smile was wider now, impossible, stretching across his face like a wound. He held another pizza box, his fingers pale and unnaturally long. "Delivery," he said, his voice muffled through the door, flat and mechanical. "It's for you, Emily, already paid for." She backed away, her hands pressed to her mouth. The bell rang again and again, a relentless rhythm that matched the ticking of the clock. She ran to the kitchen, grabbing a chair to wedge under the doorknob, but the ringing didn't stop. The mist outside was thicker now, a solid wall that hid the street, the neighbors, the world. The house was an island, and she was alone with him. The ringing stopped at 9:13 a.m., replaced by a soft tapping at the window. Tap, pause, tap. Emily turned, her breath shallow, and saw him outside the kitchen window, his face pressed against the glass, his smile unchanged. His eyes were too large, too dark, like holes in his face. "You didn't eat the pizza," he said, his voice clear despite the glass, despite the mist. "You have to eat it, Emily." She screamed, stumbling back, and ran upstairs. her feet slipping on the carpet. She locked herself in her bedroom, shoving a dresser against the door. The tapping followed, moving from window to window, circling the house. The clock downstairs ticked, audible even here, marking 9:27 a.m. She sat on the bed, her knees drawn to her chest, and waited. The tapping stopped, but the silence was worse, heavy with expectation. At 9:45 a.m., she heard the front door creak open. She hadn't unlocked it, hadn't heard it break, but the sound was unmistakable. Footsteps followed, slow and deliberate, moving through the living room, the kitchen, the hallway. They stopped at the bottom of the stairs. Emily. The voice called, soft now, almost gentle. It's time to eat. She didn't move, didn't breathe. The footsteps climbed the stairs, one creak at a time, unhurried. They stopped outside her door. The knob rattled, once, twice, then fell silent. She waited, her heart a drum in her chest, but nothing happened. Minutes passed or hours, she couldn't tell. The clock downstairs ticked. The mist pressed against the windows. The house held its breath. At 10:03 a.m., she heard a new sound, a soft thud, like something being placed on the floor. She waited, listening, but the footsteps didn't return. She stood, her legs unsteady, and moved the dresser, her hands shaking. She opened the door, peering into the hallway. It was empty, the air cold and damp. On the floor just outside her door was another pizza box. She didn't touch it. She stepped over it, moving downstairs, her eyes scanning every shadow. The front door was open, the mist curling inside like smoke. The living room was unchanged, the kitchen the same, but the pizza boxes were gone from the counter. The trash bin in the yard was empty too, the dozens of boxes vanished. The house was quiet, the clock ticking toward 10:15 a.m. Emily walked to the front door, her steps slow, deliberate. The mist was thinning now, the street visible again, the houses still dark. She stepped onto the porch, the air cold against her skin, and looked back at the house. It was hers, but it wasn't. Something had changed, something she couldn't name. She walked away down Maple Street toward the center of Greystone. The town was waking up now, a few cars on the road, a light on in a window. She didn't stop, didn't look back. The rain had stopped, the sky a dull gray, the air heavy with the promise of more. She kept walking, her socks drying on her feet, her clothes stiff with mud. At 10:39 a.m., the doorbell at 42 Maple Street rang again. No one answered. On the porch, a new pizza box sat, warm and unopened, the Tony's Pizzeria logo gleaming in the gray light. Inside, the cheese was smooth, the word next carved deep into its surface.